of slaves, one on top of the other. They were probably slaughtered when their master died, or prisoners of war, and so on and so forth. To them, it was not probably human sacrifice. What we consider human sacrifice is not the same thing with what they consider human sacrifice. A slave or a prisoner of war is an object, is not a human being.
Interestingly, although human sacrifice is prevalent in the mythology of Greece and the Trojan War, Homer never mentions it in the Iliad. It's a few hundred years after Homer when some of the greatest Greek playwrights incorporate human sacrifice into their stories of the Trojan War. One reason may have been as a storytelling device to entertain their audiences.
It's often true that forms of religious behavior that were once sacrosanct and received great veneration later on become the subject for horror and a way of getting a chill, really, out of the audience.
So in the story of the Trojan War, Agamemnon succeeds at assembling a coalition of Mycenaean warriors. But as they ready to set sail for Troy, the winds blow against them. The oracle tells Agamemnon, for favorable winds, he must sacrifice his daughter, Iphigenia.
He did so by summoning her to Aulis on the pretext that she was going to be married to Achilles. Instead, he butchered her, and in so doing, set in train a terrible set of events that would end in his own death.
To the Greeks, this was a powerful message, whether real or mythological. In war, a king asks his subjects to sacrifice the lives of their sons. Now the king, by offering his daughter, is making a similar sacrifice. The Greeks may see it as democratic and egalitarian. If not us, why not the king? And if not our sons, why not his daughter?
To us, the idea of sacrificing Iphigenia seems horrific. But given the religion and mores of the time, the sacrifice of Iphigenia was a supreme expression of commitment on the part of Agamemnon. He was so committed to the success of this enterprise that he was willing to sacrifice his own daughter. That must have had an effect upon the psyche of his soldiers, because they recognized how dedicated he was and how much he expected of them.
Thus, the first blood spilled in the Trojan War is that of a child. Ultimately, Agamemnon will pay for her death with his life. But for now, a forceful wind blows the Greek war fleet east to Troy. What the Greeks didn't know is the resistance they were about to meet at the hands of man-killing Hector and his army of Trojans. To forge a coalition of Mycenaean warriors and satisfy the gods, Agamemnon makes the ultimate sacrifice, the ritual murder of his own daughter. In 1,000 ships, the Greeks sail east to Troy with dreams of wealth and honor. But their overwhelming force is negated by the fierce Trojans and their powerful allies. They fight to a standstill for 10 long years. Now, powerful egos and dissension in the Greek ranks threaten to destroy the coalition from within. This is the true story of Troy. It is an epic clash of civilizations, a defining moment in prehistory to which, once again, Homer may be our best witness.
In the 16,000 lines or so of Homer's Iliad, he explores all the major questions which we still grapple with as we make war today and consider the questions around warfare. the justification for a major military exercise, the accountability, the quality of military leadership, the nature of courage and cowardice on the battlefield, and indeed what happens to victors and defeated alike in the face of day-to-day brutality.
And yet, in his Iliad, Homer doesn't chronicle the entire 10 years of battle. He focuses on just 4 days of the war's 10th and final year.
He brings us, I think, to the very heart of what human conflict is all about. Some of his most memorable descriptions are of men dying. The 240 deaths that occur in the Iliad, all are different. Homer must have seen action at first hand. He must surely have gone over the battlefield at Troy and tried in his own imagination to recreate how this battle took place. We see warfare from so many different angles, and we see it up close and personal from Homer.
Warriors face off on the battlefield, calling out names and insults. Soldiers thrust spears through enemy eyes, swinging swords, hacking off limbs. Homer says black blood stains the battlefield. His name defines this brutal age of warfare, known as the heroic or Homeric era.
This was very much an individual contest for personal glory. And there was believed to be a glory in the nature of your opponents and in the extent of your success over them. It's a bit more tribal. The nature of your military reputation depends upon who you individually fight and how well you do against them.
Homer describes many duels, but one he portrays as the ultimate duel, the one to end 10 years of war. Menelaus, the offended husband of Helen, is challenged by Paris, Helen's Trojan lover. If Paris kills Menelaus, Helen stays in Troy and the Greeks withdraw defeated. If Menelaus kills Paris, he reclaims Helen, takes a king's ransom of gold from Troy, and Greek honor is restored.
The two armies sit down and the duel takes place. This is sanity, Homer is saying. This is how it should be. But it's not how it goes.
Menelaus and Paris cross swords, risking life and honor to end a decade of conflict. Menelaus overpowers Paris, readies a death blow. Then Homer rescues Paris with a stroke of divine intervention. The goddess of love, Aphrodite, whisks Paris off the battlefield into the arms of Helen. The duel ends unfulfilled. The truce erupts in war.
This war, in a certain sense, had to be. More forces had been unleashed than could now be contained. But at that short, brief moment of time, Homer seems to be saying, this is how conflict should be resolved between the only interested parties.
Though ending a war with a duel between two leaders may be wishful fantasy, many of Homer's observations of battle are timelessly true.
One of the underlying themes that you draw out of the Iliad and the Odyssey that remains relevant today in a military setting is that character matters. That theme remains with us. We still are very concerned for the character of our officers and our soldiers.
Modern armies can learn from the soldiers of the Trojan War. But the greatest of the Greek warriors, Achilles, might not last long in today's army. In front of other warlords, Achilles threatens and insults Agamemnon, his commanding officer.
What a worthless, burnt-out coward I'd be called if I would submit to you and all your orders. whatever you blurt out. Fling them at others. Don't give me commands. Never again, I trust, will Achilles yield to you.
To Homer's audience, Achilles' rage against Agamemnon reflects a conflicted hero defending his honor. But today, his insults would be court-martialed as insubordination.
Achilles was preoccupied with his reputation and his personal standing amongst the Greeks. The absolute opposite of a team player. Odysseus is of course, a different character, and again, he's yet another expression of the fact that character matters. He is wily. He's compared to a fox. Even today, we compare some of our most capable military figures to foxes.
The swamp fox, Francis Marion of the American Revolution, and General Franks of the war in Iraq are among some with reputations of cunning like a fox. But Homer highlights another key quality of leadership by demonstrating the opposite.
Never once did you arm with the troops and go to battle. You lacked the courage. King who devours his people.
Unlike an ideal general like George Washington, who leads his troops by example, Agamemnon is accused of hanging out in the back while others fight and die.
Agamemnon is arrogant, overweening, very much given to advance his own personal agenda, and inclined in the mind of others to take advantage of his position for his personal gain rather than to be a servant of the rest.
Ironically, the soldier who is idealized by Homer is Hector, who fights for Troy. He has the character of the model soldier and citizen.
Hector is more inclined to set the welfare of his people and his city above his own reputation and his own survival. And ultimately, he faced down Achilles even though he knew that the odds were against him and that his time was up.
The battle between the two greatest heroes, Greek Achilles and Trojan Hector, is the climax of the Iliad and Homer's story of Troy. When Hector takes leave of his wife and child on his way to battle, Homer foreshadows the end of the war and tilts the sympathies of his audience in favor of the Trojans.
Hector envisages that Andromache will be a widow and that his son Astyanax will be an orphan. And like any true husband there, he says, I care for you more than I do for my countrymen. It's your fate that really matters to me.
Homer portrays Hector as a family man. While the Greeks are fighting for revenge and greed, Hector is fighting to defend his wife, his child, and his home.
The Trojans, in a sense, are us, and it is through their eyes, very largely, through the eyes of men like Hector, that we read the events that are going to be so shattering.
Hector sees Achilles charging like a stallion. Achilles closes, helmet flashing, throws his spear and misses. Hector hurls his spear, striking Achilles' shield dead center, and glances off. Hector draws his sword and charges, but Achilles has a second spear and drives it clean through Hector's neck. Hector falls to the dust and gasps, pleading with Achilles to return his dead body to Troy. But Achilles promises to feed his body to the dogs, lashes his corpse to his chariot, whips his horses to run around the walls of Troy, and as Homer says, defiles Hector's body in the land of his own fathers. And in the last great scene of Homer's poem, King Priam comes to beg for the mutilated body of Hector, his son.
King Priam comes, and he grasps the man-slaying hands of Achilles, and like a suppliant,